Okay, so good afternoon and welcome to Monkhouse on Mondays. Today I'm joined by Cliff Collins. Now, Cliff and I go back, I think, to probably reps and skills active days when I did a little bit of work and you were doing reps. But Cliff, you work for Europe Active now, don't you? So what do you do for Europe Active?
I do. Well, I have the grand title of Programs Director, and that really breaks into two areas. One is the politics around it. You call it public affairs, we call it European affairs. So that's particularly coordinating with the European Commission, the European Parliament, the other institutions and civil society organisations. And the second part is in the area of European funded actions and programmes. And sometimes that's co-funded, sometimes it's fully funded, but it means that we're connecting all across Europe because we have a common aim and ambition to see promotion of health enhancing physical activity, for example. So that's the general story, but behind that there's lots of other more detailed work which takes place, of course.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of that work later on. But before we do, Cliff, I know you do a lot of travel, or you were doing a lot of travel before COVID lockdown, but how have you managed to stay fit and active during the lockdown period?
Well, I'm one of the lucky ones, really. I live in a rather beautiful part of East Sussex. I've got a very large garden, my green gym, as I call it. It's quite hilly where I live, so I make sure it's 10,000 steps a day minimum, and a lot of that is uphill, so that's quite good, you know, getting out of breath a bit. But my garden is the main area of my physical activity, and thank goodness I've had it really over these last weeks. It's my sanity saver, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I often find when I get that moment of stress, actually going and mowing the lawn just gives you that chance to just break out, get some air, do something, and give you which is really useful.
Totally agree. Well, to give you an idea, if I cut my grass by hand, it's 20,000 steps.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. I did one of those Strava things the other day when I mowed mine, just so I could see the pattern. It was quite interesting. It's certainly not 20,000. Brilliant. Right. So, Cliff, talk to me about what Europe Active have been up to, because it's been really interesting, because there's been different levels of lockdown, there's been different opening dates, there's been different rules. How have Europe Active supported the health and fitness and physical activity sector as we go through these different times?
Yes, well, it was pretty dramatic at times in March, as countries across Europe were locking down. Quite frightening for a lot of people, very high level of uncertainty. There was a big split between the Scandinavian, northern European countries to the reaction in the southern countries. Immediately, much more business support, employee support was given in the north compared to the south. So in terms of business survivability, immediately there were great concerns what would happen. At a personal level, of course, some people have had a really rough and tough time. It has been really traumatic for them. And a lot of our stakeholders, our members, particularly national associations, picked up the phone to us to say, help, what can you do to help? And the number one from a lot of countries was, give us the money. Can we open up the coffers of the European Commission? And the answer to that is, unfortunately, no, that's not how they fund these things. It's done through the member states, as they're called, country by country. It's not us, that we don't hold that money in any way whatsoever. But also it was very much every country for themselves. It was not a coordinated approach, and the Commission was very much wrong-footed, as much as we were in those circumstances. But we very quickly got momentum into that, and we had already initiated what we call the European Fitness Association Forum, EFAF. Everything in Europe has an acronym, David. And so we were regularly bringing together our national associations. So think of UK Active for the UK, there's Ireland Active, Spain Active, France Active, all across Europe, 23 in total. Yeah. So we would have these Zoom webinars and meetings where we were comparing and sharing. And I think it's actually one of the very positive aspects of the whole experience is how much people were prepared to help each other, support them through this, share the ideas, bring resources to it, because for many of these organisations, not only did they not have a lot of resources behind them, but the big area they lacked was technical.
Right.
They didn't have that technical grounding sufficient, and they didn't know where to look. So that was one of the key areas of Europe Active's involvement. Over some years now, we have been working at the European level of developing some standards for how fitness centres have to operate.
Yeah.
UK Active have been a very big part of this work with the British Standards Institute. And these are European standards, which have now been published, as you perhaps know. Last year, part one of these came out, which was covering all of the operational and management of fitness centres. And they're really, it's a very unusual set of standards because it's for a service sector application. But for us, it's always been a task to try and help to professionalise the European fitness sector and to have some really good standards in place. Yeah. So in the UK, you'd recognise Quest and the UK Active Code of Practice. And think of that really as a much more higher level, much more, although they don't have a legal basis, they still have that effect over time. And this is something which I think the fitness sector is only just waking up to.
So the standards that you're talking about, those standards are the EN 17229 ones, aren't they? It's the standards for the operation of a fitness club. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with you on some of these standards and trying to almost create some online learning to help people understand those. So how is that going to work across Europe? How will people interact with those standards?
Yes, well, the challenge of Europe is that we have 23 different languages, and you're going to have many different layers of complexity of cultural approaches to the use of standards or the way that fitness centres should operate. And again, you see a bit of a break between the southern countries to where they would be experienced in Northern European, Scandinavian countries. So the standards are broken down into now into 10 different packages of e-learning. A very simple explanation of what the standards mean, because if you look at the standards themselves, they're rather dry and impenetrable even. They are published in every language, by the way, so even if you're in Italy or Spain or Czech Republic or Romania, you can access these standards in your own national language. But for most operators, they haven't got a clue really what they mean in practice. Right. So this work which we've been doing now is to try and translate that into those practical terms. This is what a risk assessment means. This is how you should treat your customers. This is how you should set up a proper maintenance program, and this is how you look after your equipment, and so on and so forth. To many of our operators in the UK and beyond, that's what they do. But in many other clubs, and typically across Europe, they are small, independent, or even family-owned or community-owned facilities. And by the way, we have 62,000 clubs, or had 62,000 clubs across Europe. It's a massive number, and in every size and shape and form. So these standards are trying to level out that approach to it to make sure that our customers can get a very good and reliable and safe experience going into the fitness centre.
Yeah, and my understanding is in some of the northern areas that actually insurance can be reduced for these clubs as a result of them having accreditation as the national standard.
Yes, yes, it's true. That's really true. Yes, the insurance industry also divided itself up country by country, but the principles are absolutely the same. If you're reducing risk for your customers and indeed your employees because you're running a safe environment, which is compliant with the European standards, then you reduce your risk. And even in the event of something going wrong, this is life, accidents happen, and the worst case is you might get taken to court for something like this. This is used as your line of defence, that you work to these standards, in which case the payouts or the liabilities levels are much reduced. So the insurance industry really like this type of thing. In fact, we could really trace the antecedents of this back to some experience in Switzerland 30 years ago, working with the health insurance industry, who were then signposting people to go into fitness centres, realising there were no proper standards, and they might be sending their people who were buying their health insurance into a pretty dangerous situation. So out of that came the original thinking at a European level that we've got to get the act together. Why not? We know that if any business works to good standards, you're going to have an even better business at the end of the day.
Absolutely, and that's a really good example of Europe Active bringing together a product to help the whole of Europe improve in what they do. I'm really interested to see what sort of learnings we can take from the UK. You know, we've got our opening date of the 25th of July. We're not that far away. Is there anything that strikes you that has happened in Europe that we should be aware of in the UK, ready for that reopening date?
Yes, we have a lot of evidence now from clubs across Europe who've been open. In Czech Republic, they were the first country to come out of 100% lockdown. And we helped them to develop some guidance, which they convinced their national government on how they would operate the fitness facility. We're now in version 4 of that guidance. As a result, we survey all across Europe clubs which are opening, and the general experience is, which I think is kind of predictable, that you get the what some people call the superheroes who return. You know, they're the invincible people you see in your club. You know, I'm going to train hard, I'm going to carry on. That nasty virus isn't going to get me. Well, it could. Of course, you're just as vulnerable as anyone else. But they tend to be the first coming back into the clubs. And mainly men, which has been somewhat putting to a lot of women club users. They get enough courage to go back into the clubs, but then find a lot of guys in there and they turn around and walk back out.
Right.
So the reassurance, so the big picture here is to build confidence with your members, to encourage them that it is a safe and proper place. So like the European standards, for example, and you know, we've run a special module on COVID-19 training to help all your staff and your operations people to understand what they need to do and keep reminding them of what they need to do to keep the clubs as safe as possible, and what to do in the event of an emergency and if something is going wrong. But we are seeing that most clubs are opening around 40% of usage rates. Of course, you have to manage your customers well. You can't get them all coming back at the same time, so you have to have some form of arrangement with them, prior booking, limiting the time, making sure they're fully aware of what they're going to face when they come in the clubs. Maybe some areas are closed. What are the cleaning regimes? How do you expect them to conduct themselves? What should they bring with them? Maybe your cafe isn't open, so they need to bring water with them or a hydration drink, whatever. Maybe they're not aware that these may be the conditions, how long they can stay in the building, the fact that physical exercises might be limited in some areas. You can't do your workout in your normal way. Certainly for group exercise classes, spinning there, it's a very different experience. But even clubs now across Europe who've been open for some weeks, applying all very good practical standards and procedures, most haven't got past 70% reuse rate when compared to pre-COVID. So it's too early to call it yet exactly what effect that will have, but of course financially, for a lot of businesses, you can't run yourself at 70% of income levels. So there is an issue building in here, which we're monitoring very carefully. It does vary a bit country to country. On the other side, what we're seeing is that activity tracking systems are really seeing that people are maintaining their activity levels. So they're not going back to the clubs necessarily, but they are staying active in other ways, in other means.
That's really interesting. So can I pick up on some of that information that you've just talked about? Is there a website you're sharing it?
Yes. No, please do. Yes. So
we go to Europe.
Yeah, sorry, we don't publish all the facts and figures because it's such a fast-moving situation. You know, the height of the shutdown, 95% of all clubs across Europe, these 62,000 clubs, were closed, 95%. Sweden was almost the only country to keep them open, but under restriction. So again, that was fairly arbitrary because there's no guide to this. But anyone aged over 70, for example, were not allowed in the clubs, and that was a bit silly, really, because there are plenty of active and fit 70-year-olds, as we know, who should be going into the clubs, and plenty of unfit younger people who shouldn't have been going in the clubs. And operators were completely in a complete mess over that. But the one big issue is the confidence. How can you build confidence with your members that it's safe to come back into your club environment? In southern countries, they can be a bit more imaginative because car parks become outdoor workout areas, for example. A bit more problematic where we are with the rain guns or whatever. You can't really do that. But maybe you could have tents or marquees or something like that to expand your space. I think in the UK it's around about 10 square meters per person in a club, which is a European average sort of figure. Some countries as low as 4 and others around 15 square meters.
Right.
Certainly in terms of the group exercise experience, that has had a very dramatic effect. Many classes can't take place. And one of the pinch points has been, in the early days for some clubs, very poor management of people waiting to come into classes. So they're bunching together outside doors and they're not, so you need to leave sufficient time between classes to allow people to come in and out and this type of thing. Bit of a learning curve.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point to finish on, is actually lots of countries have had learning points. So we don't need to make the same mistakes. So thank you for raising those challenges, Cliff. It's been absolutely to talk to you again. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy your weekend. And we will catch you soon, I'm sure. Take care, Cliff.
All the best.